The opening statement on behalf of NHS Blood and Transplant, Charlie Cory-Wright, Queen's Counsel.
Thank you, Sir Brian, and good afternoon to those infected, those affected, to other core participants and others here and interested in this inquiry. My name is Charlie Cory-Wright. I'm representing the NHS Blood and Transplant. It's a mistake that a number of us seem to make. Does not belie the seriousness of all of this in this inquiry. I'm a barrister, instructed by Weightmans solicitors. At the moment, I'm the only barrister instructed. That may change if it turns out that it's more cost-effective to instruct anyone more junior as well. I will explain more in a moment about NHS Blood and Transplant and its place within the NHS. NHS Blood and Transplant is an unwieldy and dangerous name, as we've already discovered, and staff in the organisation generally refer to it as NHSBT. I'm aware that initials can sometimes be annoying and confusing and sound like jargon, particularly when lots are being used, but I hope that using that shorter form today is sensible. And I'm going to use the word we, both for accuracy and for economy, when describing NHSBT and its team for the inquiry. I should explain first what I propose to do in these 15 minutes. People are entitled to know about NHSBT, what it is, and our role here. So I'm going to do the following. I'm going to make a few important preliminary remarks about this inquiry and about NHSBT's approach to it. Secondly, I'm going to say a little about NHSBT's history. That's important given the historical scope of this inquiry. And thirdly, I'm going to describe in a little more detail NHSBT's hopes for the inquiry and what it aims to help achieve for everyone concerned. It goes, we hope, without saying that NHSBT fully supports the inquiry and all of its terms of reference. Our primary concern is for those who were given infected blood or infected blood products, and for their families and others who've been affected by this. We do know that we can never truly understand the impact this has had on the infected, their families and loved ones. However, we do of course know that that impact has been devastating. One only has to have paid attention to what has been said over the last 3 days to be aware of that. We understand that our job is to provide the inquiry team with all the help that we can in fulfilling its terms of reference. We will do whatever we can to assist the inquiry in order that answers can be provided to the questions asked by those infected and those affected. We will be open, constructive and honest. Our motivation is to get to the truth for those infected and affected to the best of our abilities. In that sense, we share, we hope, the same approach as the inquiry itself. Indeed, we understand that this inquiry is, above all things, a search after truth, the unvarnished truth about all of the many disquieting things that we have been hearing about over the last 3 days. We do get it, that if the inquiry is able to do that job properly, then that is likely to include the uncovering of facts that are seriously unpalatable. Whatever those truths may be, we want to say, loud and clear at the outset, that we too are very sorry for what happened to all those infected, all those affected, all who are victims. We also understand that actions speak louder than words. We hope that we are demonstrating that in our cooperation with the inquiry, both thus far and as it continues, as well as in terms of the safety measures we now apply in screening protocols and the like, which I will outline in a moment. We do understand and embrace the need for the inquiry to apply current clinical science and current standards and norms to its scrutiny of what went wrong. It's only by doing that that the lessons that need to be learnt will be clear. Finally, I hope I can help by, finally in this introductory section, I hope I can help by mentioning this morning's invitation by Stephen Snowden QC, who raised Bishop James Jones's 6-point charter for public bodies and invited those here involved to sign up to that charter. That question having been raised, NHSBT has considered the charter and its 6 points. We do not see those 6 points as any different to the commitment that we were already making to the inquiry. And in those circumstances, NHSBT confirms its intention to be guided by and to strive to follow those principles. I should explain who's been here this week from NHSBT. On Monday, at the commemoration and opening of the inquiry, there were Dr. Gail Mifflin, NHSBT Medical and Research Director, and Roy Griffiths, one of our longest-standing non-executive directors. Yesterday, there were Millie Banerjee, the chair of NHSBT, and Sally Johnson, our interim chief executive, and Dr. Mifflin again. Today, there are Dr. Sheila McLennan, a very senior consultant at NHSBT, who is also the chair of the Joint United Kingdom Blood Transfusion and Tissue Transplantation Services Professional Advisory Committee, a mouthful which I shall refer to further down the line as JPAC. And Professor David Roberts, who is also a long-standing senior consultant and associate medical director at NHSBT. So, what is NHSBT? Well, it is, as you have heard, one of the 4 blood services, each dealing with a different part of the UK, involved as core participants in this inquiry. It is, as such, an NHS body involved in the provision of blood to others for the treatment by clinicians of patients who require that. NHSBT is an independent, formally described as an executive arm's length body of the Department of Health and Social Care, technically constituted as a special health authority. That all sounds quite complex, but essentially we are not a government department and we are not part of one. We do work closely with the UK government and the Department of Health and Social Care and are accountable through our chief executive to them and ultimately to the Secretary of State. I should add that NHSBT is not to be equated with the NHS as a whole, or indeed to be treated as some way representing the NHS as a whole. NHSBT's role, as described just now, clearly justifies its status as a core participant in this inquiry. But if other NHS bodies ought to be involved, no doubt they will be. We all heard on Monday that the inquiry is considering involving other such bodies, and that's obviously a developing picture. Its history, briefly. NHSBT was established in 2005 when the National Blood Authority and UK Transplant merged, with the responsibility to provide a blood and transplantation service to the NHS. We initially provided a blood service to England and to North Wales, but that changed to England alone in May 2016, when the All Wales Blood Service was formed. Providing a blood service includes the recruitment of blood donors and collection, testing and manufacturing of blood components, which we then deliver to hospitals in the NHS. We've always been responsible for organ donation and transplantation services to the whole of the UK. We also manage the donation, storage and transplantation of tissues and stem cells. Of particular relevance are our responsibilities to encourage people to donate organs, blood and tissue, to optimise the safety and supply of blood, organs, stem cells and tissue, to help raise the quality, effectiveness and clinical outcomes of blood and transplant services, to provide expert evidence to other NHS organisations and the 4 UK health departments, to commission and conduct research and development to improve outcomes for patients, and to implement relevant EU statutory frameworks and guidance. Now, as I've already said, the history of the organisation is important given the historical scope of the inquiry. Although NHSBT itself has only existed since 2005, there have obviously been a number of predecessor bodies, many of which no longer exist. The precise family tree is complicated, and we're going to provide a diagram to the inquiry showing the family tree so that all can see clearly how this works. But for present purposes, we hope it's enough to say that we recognise that we will be speaking for and providing documentation in place of those defunct predecessor bodies in regard to the inquiry. To this end, we'll provide information to the inquiry relating to the National Blood Authority, which was formed in '93, itself formed by a combination of earlier bodies with equivalent responsibilities. I've referred to JPAC already. That's the Professional Advisory Committee that deals with this. It is not a legal entity in itself. It now lies under the governance of NHSBT, and we will be ensuring that its documents too, and those relating to its predecessor bodies, are made available to the inquiry. Our role in the inquiry. We've already had a good and cooperative dialogue with the inquiry team about such obvious and highly important matters as the location and disclosure of relevant documentation, a very significant exercise for all concerned. We have suggested cooperation between us and the inquiry team in the task of searching, both by computer and manually, the extensive archive now available. We are planning an event for core participants, including those infected and those affected, to demonstrate how blood services have changed beyond recognition since the 1970s and 80s, both in our policy making, particularly around who is allowed to donate, of which more in a moment, but also in the technology and processes used for testing and manufacturing blood components. We have also invited the inquiry team to visit any part of our organisation to show how modern blood testing and manufacturing is now performed. We are glad to hear the inquiry is keen to take us up on this invitation. I'd like to say something now about NHSBT's relationship with the public. The first thing to say is that we are, of course, extremely grateful to all those who become blood donors, and we thank them for their continued support and commitment to our blood service. The NHS could not run as it currently does without them. They are everyday heroes in what they do to save and improve other people's lives. Next, a number of things about the need to maintain the trust of all members of the public in the blood services we provide. We recognise how important this is. We would hope that all of this would be obvious, but sometimes it's important to say things expressly, even if they should be clear implicitly. Any one of us here today may have been, or may be in the future, a recipient of a blood component. Transfusion of a human substance can never, by its very nature, be entirely risk-free, and to receive one you must be unwell or sufficiently in need of a transfusion for the benefits of the procedure to outweigh any inherent risks. For precisely that reason, we must do all we can to ensure that we recognise properly the value and importance of individuals' lives, health and well-being, and that of their loved ones, and effectively to reassure all concerned that this is so. We repeat our commitment to do all we can to make the blood components that we deliver to hospitals today as safe as we reasonably can. More on that in a moment. We also recognise that we are part of the NHS and that we do this within the system as a whole. We wish to reassure the inquiry and the wider public that modern safety standards are rigorous and our blood supply is one of the safest in the world. Again, more on that in a moment. In terms of reassurance as to the current position, it is important in the circumstances that I say something about these current practices and procedures. Safety is at the forefront of everything we do. These are not just words. Our actions are prompted and directed by the guidelines and the testing that are in place to protect both donors and patients, and we're subject to regular inspections by independent regulators. Our safety policy is formulated by two separate advisory committees, JPAC, already referred to, and the Advisory Committee on the Safety of Blood, Tissues and Organs. All blood donations are routinely tested for hepatitis B, hepatitis C, hepatitis E, human immunodeficiency virus, syphilis, and for the first-time donors, human T lymphotropic virus, before they're released into the supply chain. If any blood donation tests positive for infection, it is not released into the blood supply chain and therefore cannot be issued to a patient. The donor is also given appropriate support and advice. Also, every donor completes an extensive donor health check questionnaire before each donation. This is designed to detect donors who have a recognizable risk of infection who can then be excluded or subject to further testing. Those considered at risk are asked to defer donation until it's safe for them to do so. For example, if a donor has travelled to an area where malaria is present, they're asked not to donate for 4 months, even though they've remained well throughout, due to the risk of passing on an undiagnosed malarial infection. If someone's had their ears pierced, even though the risk of getting hepatitis B from such is very small, they're also asked not to donate for 4 months. These are very low risks indeed, but demonstrate the lengths we go to protect recipients of blood today. We have also, with the other UK blood services, established a UK-wide haemovigilance system called SHOT, Serious Hazards of Transfusion. This is a blood supply surveillance scheme where all hospitals in the UK report, as a condition of their registration, any recognised or unexpected reactions to blood products to this body. This operates through a group of internal and external experts who work with professional independence and make recommendations to hospitals and blood services. It allows us to understand how changes we have made may have impacted on patients, and also allows us to pick up early signs of any unexpected impending problems. Whilst we hope that the rigour of our current systems offers some reassurance going forward, we are constantly vigilant to any possible threat to the safety of the blood supply. Most importantly, we also appreciate that this does not at all address the historic issues that have brought us here, and we fully understand and believe in the need to answer questions and provide explanations to those whose lives have been devastated, from whom and on whose behalf we have heard so powerfully. In conclusion, we hope that all of this provides some assurance to the inquiry and to those infected and those affected, and to the wider public as to NHSBT's desire and determination to assist the inquiry process as fully as possible. We are acutely aware of the particular importance that this inquiry is able to submit its report quickly, in order to benefit as many people as possible. We reiterate our absolute commitment to honesty, openness and transparency, and to assisting the inquiry in every way we can. We have provided the inquiry team with initial evidence and disclosed a large amount of information to it. As we've already said, we've also met with them to discuss arrangements for them to inspect a considerable number of documents and undertake searches for what they consider relevant to the inquiry. We've confirmed to them that they will have access to search and examine any of the documents that we hold. We will continue to work closely with the team to ensure that all requests for information are properly dealt with in a timely manner. We will also be working closely with the inquiry and the Department of Health and Social Care to ensure that any documents from our predecessor organisations that have not already been identified are made available. Those whose lives have been so tragically affected have waited a very long time for an investigation that satisfies their concerns. It has come too late for some, and to say that that must be a matter of huge regret for all does not remotely do justice to the situation. However, we have an opportunity here to help provide answers to those who so unquestionably deserve them. We intend to take it.
Thank you, Mr. Cory-Wright. Simon Bowie QC appears to make the opening statement on behalf of the Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, sir. My name is Simon Bowie, and I represent the Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service, or SNBTS. I'm instructed by the Scottish Health Service Central Legal Office. At the outset, I and SNBTS would like to offer our deepest sympathy to all those who have been affected by the subject matter of this inquiry, something which has been spoken about so eloquently by so many over the past few days. In this statement, I'm going to say a few words about the following. First, who SNBTS is and what it does. Secondly, its relationship with the other UK blood services. Thirdly, its views specifically about the terms of reference. And fourthly, and perhaps most importantly, its attitude towards this inquiry generally. And I'll deal with the last of these first. SNBTS is pleased to be here as a core participant at the very outset of this significant inquiry. It recognises that the issues which will be addressed during the inquiry are of great importance to those people who have been infected and affected, but also to organisations like SNBTS within the NHS, and of course to the general public as a whole. SNBTS recognises that as a core participant, it has a contribution to make to the work of this inquiry. In that regard, it has sought to engage positively with the various requests made to it by the inquiry team. It has been able to respond promptly when asked to produce, for example, the large amounts of documentation which it holds. Going forward, I can assure the inquiry team and the chairman, sir, that SNBTS will continue to adopt this attitude. It knows how important it is to the work of the inquiry and to its securing its objectives that organisations like SNBTS fully engage with the process. In the coming months and years, SNBTS hopes to make a material contribution to the work of the inquiry and looks forward to assisting the chairman and inquiry team in whatever ways it can. Likewise, I know that the Scottish health boards have the same attitude and will do likewise. SNBTS was also a core participant in the Penrose inquiry and fully engaged with it over a number of years. Standing that involvement, it is believed that SNBTS is well qualified to assist in the work of this inquiry. What does SNBTS do, and what's its relationship with the other UK blood services? The Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service sits within NHS National Services Scotland and is part of NHS Scotland. It is the specialist provider of blood, tissues and cells in Scotland. As an organisation, it is quite separate and distinct from its counterparts in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, being set up and run within a peculiarly Scottish political, legal and social framework. It does, however, collaborate closely with the other UK blood services in, for example, ensuring the development and maintenance of guidelines and standards. As well as ensuring the supply of blood, SNBTS also supplies human tissues and cells, such as bone, heart valves and tendons, all of which are vital for the numerous operations carried out every day across Scotland. Its core purpose is to ensure that NHS Scotland has adequate blood supplies to meet the transfusion needs of all patients in Scotland. In that regard, it is critical that it maintains public confidence in the nation's blood supply. SMBTS believes that this inquiry will be important to that end. Finally, SMBTS relies on its relationship with the public because it is only with the willingness of the public to donate that SMBTS can do the work it does. The organisation carries out all of these functions by working in close partnership with communities, donors, hospitals and healthcare professionals. It seeks to ensure that it can supply donated blood, tissues and cells for use in the treatment of all patients. Its aim is to deliver a transfusion service for the benefit of all patients in Scotland. In all of this, its goal is to treat with care and respect all of those who are affected by its work. Lastly, some comments in relation to the terms of reference. In relation to the terms of reference, it would respectfully appear to SMBTS that all of the issues identified are of significant public importance and would not for its part seek to prioritise any issue or issue in particular over others. SMBTS will assist in all relevant matters and looks forward to working with the Chairman, the inquiry team and all of the other participants in the coming months. Thank you very much.
The opening statement on behalf of the Welsh Blood Service by Debra Powell QC.
Thank you, sir, and good afternoon to you and to everyone here. I represent the Welsh Blood Service with Ms. Susanna Rickard. The Welsh Blood Service is not a freestanding entity of itself. It is a division of Velindre University NHS Trust. Legal and Risk Services of NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership are the appointed legal representatives for Velindre. Although Velindre University NHS Trust is the statutory body, I shall refer throughout, for the sake of ease, to the Welsh Blood Service. It's right that I start by saying that the Welsh Blood Service recognises the huge importance of the work that the inquiry is to undertake. The fact that so many patients in the past were infected with terrible diseases as a result of receiving infected blood and infected blood products that were intended to help them was, as you, sir, said in your opening remarks, a catastrophe. We are acutely aware that the lives of the victims and of their families have been utterly devastated and in many cases lost, and we are very sorry for what happened and for what you have suffered. We agree wholeheartedly with what has been said by so many of the speakers so far, that the victims and their families are entitled to answers to the questions that they've been asking for so long. We fully support the inquiry and its terms of reference and are committed to assisting the inquiry honestly and openly to enable answers to be given to those important questions. And to respond to Mr. Snowden QC this morning, yes, and to be clear, our objective is to assist the search for truth. We have established a dedicated team to work on the needs of the inquiry generally. But perhaps the most significant aspect of the assistance that we can provide to the inquiry, certainly at this stage, is in finding and providing access to documents. We have begun the work of providing you with information and documentation, sir, in accordance with requests made by your inquiry team, and further work is being undertaken in locating documents that may be relevant to your work. Although there have been other more limited inquiries into the administration of infected blood and infected blood products to patients in the UK, the Welsh Blood Service were not asked to participate in or to provide evidence or documentation to those inquiries. And so much of the material that is now sought to be provided to your inquiry by the Welsh Blood Service is being sought for the first time. Inevitably, given the substantial period of time with which the inquiry is concerned and the organisational changes in the provision of blood services in Wales throughout that time and since, the process of finding the documents is not a straightforward one. But strenuous efforts have been and will continue to be made to make all potentially relevant documentation available to your inquiry team. And we wish to stress, as others have done, that it will be for the inquiry team to determine which of those documents are relevant. That will not be a task we will be undertaking. I'm going to say just a little about the evolution of blood services in Wales over the relevant period. In 1946, the National Blood Transfusion Service was formally established in England and Wales, with a number of regional transfusion centres, including Cardiff. And in 1948, it came under the control of the then new National Health Service. Blood services in North Wales, though, were provided from the Liverpool Regional Transfusion Centre, whilst the South Wales Regional Transfusion Centre at Cardiff covered Mid, South and West Wales. In 1994, the blood services of England came under the control of the newly created National Blood Authority, but the South Wales Regional Transfusion Centre did not become part of the NBA and was under the control of the Welsh office. The Welsh Blood Service evolved from the South Wales Regional Transfusion Centre in Cardiff at the time of Welsh devolution in 1997. It became a division of the Lindra NHS Trust, as it then was, in 1999, and at that time it still covered Mid, South and West Wales, with blood collection and distribution in North Wales, managed from Liverpool still under NHS Blood and Transplant, in accordance with the long-standing arrangements. In May 2016, for the first time, the Welsh Blood Service became an all-Wales service when it became responsible for North Wales. Today, the Welsh Blood Service collects voluntary, non-remunerated blood donations from the general public. It processes and tests those donations and distributes them to hospitals for patient care. It provides medical consultant support to hospital blood transfusion committees, and clinical advice is given to hospitals as required. It is authorised and licensed by the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, which audits the service at regular defined periods. The safety of the blood supply chain is of paramount importance to the Welsh Blood Service, and it takes the most rigorous steps in ensuring that it is safe for donors to donate blood and safe for patients to receive those blood products when they need them. We want to take this opportunity to reassure the public, whose help and support is so fundamental to the maintenance of the blood supplies that underpin the NHS today, that vital lessons have already been learned about maintaining the safety of the blood supply chain, and that blood services today are worlds away from the blood services of the past. But that in no way detracts from the importance of discovering how and why this treatment disaster happened. And you can be assured, sir, that in the difficult task ahead, you and your inquiry team will have the full cooperation of the Welsh Blood Service. Thank you.
Counsel to the inquiry, Jenni Richards QC, to respond.
Can I start by expressing our gratitude for all the contributions we've heard over the last 2 days. You have given the inquiry much food for thought, and I hope you will understand that we will want to reflect on much of what has been said. In particular, you've told us about the issues that are of the most importance to you. That is going to be of considerable value to us in compiling the draft list of issues, prioritising lines of investigation and planning the hearings. And we offer a heartfelt thank you for that. Some of you have also raised important procedural points. Again, we want to reflect on those, not least because there are still some further written submissions to come, and it's important that we consider everything that's been said. There are, however, a handful of points at which I can deal with now. Firstly, I need to correct something Mr. O'Neill said. He referred to there being in Scotland ongoing police investigations. That isn't the case, and it isn't what I said. And I've clarified this with Mr. O'Neill, and he is happy that I correct the position. The 2 police investigations in Scotland to which I referred on Monday are not ongoing. They are investigations that were closed a few years ago. But the documents relating to them have very recently been disclosed to the inquiry by Police Scotland and will now be assessed by the inquiry for relevance, cataloguing, indexing and onward disclosure to core participants. Secondly, I want to return to the issue of the participation or non-participation of the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government spokesman was reported by the BBC yesterday to have said this, and I quote, "We are in the process of discussing a number of issues with the Cabinet Office, such as the inquiry's terms of reference, in order to enable the Scottish Government and NHS Scotland bodies to participate fully in the inquiry. As we have already set out, we expect to become core participants to the inquiry once these issues are resolved." End of quote. You may be forgiven for thinking that there are a couple of minor issues to be ironed out as the sole impediments to the Scottish Government's participation in this inquiry. In fact, what we understand the issues to be are twofold. Firstly, the Scottish Government has asked the Cabinet Office to confirm that reconsideration of areas considered by Lord Penrose will be kept to a minimum. Secondly, the Scottish Government has asked that the inquiry or the Cabinet Office meets the staffing, legal and travel costs of the Scottish Government and the NHS in Scotland of participating in the inquiry. Can I deal with each of those in turn? I repeat what I said on Monday. The terms of reference have been set and they cover Scotland. We will, as we said on Monday, avoid unnecessary duplication with Penrose, and we are very grateful to the assistance of Mr. O'Neill and his team in helping us identify non-controversial matters from the Penrose report that can be utilised. But it is for the Chair to interpret and fulfil the terms of reference. It is not a matter for the Scottish Government or the Cabinet Office. We intend to be and are independent of government. And if the Scottish Government considers that the Cabinet Office can tell you, sir, what to do, it is wrong. If the Scottish Government has submissions to make about what can or should or cannot or should not be revisited from Penrose, then the appropriate means for it to do so is to become a core participant and make submissions on that issue openly, as all of you have taken the trouble to do over the last 2 days. As for the request for funding, the inquiry is not in a position to and will not be funding the Scottish Government's costs nor those of the NHS in Scotland. Can I deal then with some other matters, a handful of matters that have arisen? As I say, much of what has been said is material that we want to go away and think about. Expert groups, there was some reference to them as expert panels. They're expert groups, and that's not mere semantics, because panel is a term of art under the Inquiries Act. The experts who will, after hearing your suggestions, become members of the expert groups will not be decision makers. They will have the status of expert witnesses providing independent evidence to the inquiry. And that's important because, as witnesses, their evidence will be disclosed to core participants and published on the inquiry's website. It will not be evidence given to the chair behind closed doors. Mr. O'Neill raised a couple of queries which I hope I can answer in relation to experts. First, he asked this: if there is consensus amongst the experts, but core participants do not think that their views are well-founded, will there be an opportunity for the experts' views to be challenged? The answer to that is yes, in 2 ways. Core participants will first be able to propose questions in writing to the experts once they've seen their reports. If the answers to those questions don't address the concerns, and if the issues are of significance to the inquiry and its terms of reference, then the likely course will be that one or more of the expert members of the group will be called to give expert evidence and to be questioned. The second point Mr. O'Neill raised in his written submissions was to lay down the concern that you were unaware of whether the intention was that expert groups would be involved after the evidential stage in the process, and the extent to which they might influence your final report, sir. Again, I hope I can clarify the position. The experts will not be giving private advice to the chair at the report writing stage or any other stage. It is conceivable, of course, that the expert groups might have views to offer that might be highly relevant to the question of recommendations, if, as the chair hopes the inquiry will be in a position to do, it makes recommendations in due course. But if so, that expert evidence about recommendations will again be public and shared. The fourth point I wanted to deal with is Mr. Locke's, and indeed the concern of some others, about Maxwellisation, or the use of salmon letters. That's the process which provides for people who are to be criticised in a report to respond prior to publication. 2 concerns have been raised by core participants in this regard. Firstly, that it can lead to significant delays before the final report is published, and secondly, that it lacks transparency. Can I say we entirely understand those concerns? I can, I think, provide some reassurance on the question of delay. Our intention is that significant criticisms will already have been aired in the course of the investigation process and the hearings, and so witnesses and organisations will have had an opportunity to respond. The consequence of that is that if we have to go down the Maxwellisation or warning letters route at all, it should not lead to significant delay, because people or bodies should not need very long to respond to a criticism that's already been fully aired and explored. The second concern about lack of openness is not as easily addressed for this reason. Mr. Locke, I think, invited the inquiry to effectively jettison the entire process of Maxwellisation, and again, we completely understand why he says that. But there are certain requirements in the inquiry rules, and you will appreciate, and indeed no doubt expect no less, that the inquiry must act in accordance with the law and must act fairly. If, having heard all the evidence and read all the evidence, the Chair proposes in due course to make critical judgments or findings about individuals or organisations, as indeed he is being asked to do by so many core participants. You would not, I am sure, want any individual or organisation or organ of government to be able to say, well, we're entitled to reject those criticisms or those recommendations because the inquiry adopted a process that was unlawful or unfair. It is vital that the legitimacy of the ultimate conclusions and recommendations reached by the Chair is not undermined. Mr Locke very sensibly suggested that the inquiry consider this issue further and set out the ground rules at an early stage, and that's a very good suggestion. It's exactly what we'll do. We're going to look very carefully at what's been said. We're going to look very carefully at the requirements of the inquiry rules in that regard, and we will set out at an early stage, and certainly long before we get to the oral hearings next year, the approach that the inquiry will take to that process. Fifthly, a point raised by Mr Williams QC about witness statements. He asked that whether witness statements will be in the witness's own words and, if necessary, in the witness's own language, and the short answer to that is yes. The inquiry gets witness statements by doing something called issuing a Rule 9 request. Again, that's a requirement of the rules, addressed to the witnesses, a series of questions that the inquiry wants the witness to answer. But how those questions are answered, and indeed in what language those questions are answered, is a matter for the witness. And if the witness wants to use strong terms, that is a matter for the witness. A further point that was made, I think by Mr Steen QC, was that the inquiry should be considering what was known prior to 1970. We agree, and that's the approach that we've been taking thus far and the approach that we will continue to take. There were some very helpful practical suggestions about a timeline or a chronology, and we accept that a shared or common understanding of key dates and key events will be important, and we're going to give further consideration to the best way of achieving that practically. Mr Steen also raised the question about document ownership and whether there would be a clear record of who provides the copy of a document to the inquiry. The answer to that again is yes, both in terms of the inquiry's own document management system and in terms of the relativity database to which core participants will have access. My penultimate point in response to some submissions made, indeed by all core participants, but I have in mind particularly some submissions made by Mr Snowden this morning, particular lines of inquiry were suggested as regards documentation. And mention was made of seeking files from the Treasury and the Foreign Office. Those are extremely helpful suggestions. We will be taking those forward. And to make matters absolutely clear, we ask for unredacted copies of documents to be provided to us, and we will scrutinise any claim for legal professional privilege or public interest immunity with rigour. I have also committed, having spoken to Mr Snowden and to his junior, that the inquiry will take up the extremely troubling issue he raised about destruction of medical records and charging for medical records. That should not happen, and the inquiry team will address questions to the relevant trust as a matter of urgency. All the other points that have been raised, as I say, we will take away and reflect. The final observation I want to make is this. What came across with very great clarity and power, particularly, if I may say so, from the opening statements made by individual unrepresented core participants, is that although this inquiry is looking back over decades, and that indeed is one of the great challenges for the inquiry, this isn't an inquiry into matters of history, but into matters which continue to this day to have a profound effect on people's lives. We are acutely conscious of the enormous responsibility that rests on the inquiry's shoulders, and we will do our best to fulfil that responsibility. Thank you.
I have only a few words to say to follow that. And the first two words are thank you. Thank you in particular for what was described by one of our contributors earlier on today as the spirit in which the inquiry has begun. Because the one thing which has been palpable, I suspect to all of us, certainly it's the way that I have felt it, is the spirit of enthusiasm, cooperation, togetherness, and a faith that this inquiry will get the answers that you deserve. I intend to do my very best to make sure that it does. Thank you very much. There's a time and a place for everything. But can I just say, you are largely, not entirely, but largely core participants. And the inquiry cannot work as it should without the full participation of all its core participants. One of the encouraging things about today was not only your desire to participate, which is clear, but the promises that we have had from the Department of Health, the blood transfusion services, if I can describe them like that, across each of the 3 countries, to help as core participants. It is a pity that the Scottish Government has not yet joined them, though I would hope that in due course, I hope in quick course, it will. The reflection of the mammoth nature of the task which we are undertaking has been the sheer number of those of you who have managed to come today, despite all the difficulties of that, and I don't underestimate them. I welcome that willingness and I thank you for it. You've given me, as indeed Jenni Richards has said, many things to think about. Well, that was the purpose of the last 3 days, and it's achieved that purpose. And we must now go, having listened, the other part of listening is thinking about what's been said. And that's what we propose to do. And we will engage fully with those who are represented, with your representatives, on all the issues, including vexed issues like having witness statements prepared in time and so on. And indeed, we can start those discussions this evening, should that be necessary. But can I add 2 further things? And they're both really about visibility. These 3 days have made this scandal visible, really visible, in a way that I was told when we consulted on the terms of reference, you felt it had not been before. Now we have the press and the media to thank for that, but it has become visible, and visible to many who had not perhaps understood that they were not on their own. Some of you have said to me in the course of these 3 days that you hadn't really understood that there were others in your position until you came to this gathering. And that perhaps has been one of the great advantages of everyone coming together, properly together, for the last 3 days. But what it means is that there may be others who are watching on TV or reading the paper or looking at social media who had not until these last 3 days understood that they were people who shared what you share. And I do appeal to them, and I would ask those who can in the media to help with this, to remind everyone who wishes to come forward it is not too late. Every witness statement is important. If we are to get to the truth, it is a collaborative effort from all parties, and that may include those whose voices have not yet surfaced. If for any reason there are people who feel that they may have suffered the effects of transfusion or contaminated blood products in the past, but have not yet put their hands up or have not felt able to, can I invite them to do so? Their rights to privacy will be respected insofar as we possibly can. You will know from your experience that is so, and it will be so. But the second consequence of the visibility of these 3 days is that you may think that the inquiry will be invisible for the next 6-7 months. A number of you have said, it is so nice to see that the inquiry started. It did actually start on the 2nd of July, when the terms of reference were agreed by Parliament. But by saying it is so nice to be here at the start of the inquiry, misses the fact that for those months, very nearly 3 months, since the 2nd of July, the inquiry has actually been hard at work. And you've seen how hard at work it has been from the disclosure that we have sought, seeking documents, getting documents which some people have never seen before, and considering how best to bring you together to hear what your priorities were and to hear how we could improve the procedures of the inquiry. And we are open always to listen to better ways of doing that, whoever wishes to advise us of them. But what it means is that for those couple of months or so, you have not really felt that the inquiry was going on, and it has been. And it will do for the next 6 or 7 months. And it may seem to you that, as memories of this fade, that it was empty promise. Let me give you an assurance that tomorrow morning, before 9 o'clock, I shall be hard at work, as my inquiry team have been since the 2nd of July, a larger team than it was then, but it needs to be, and we shall stay hard at work until the job is done. We do not so much start as continue our search for the truth. Thank you.